Among the early voters, Sunday's French presidential election is Emmanuel Macron. The centrist candidate is up against the right-wing candidate Marine Le Pen. It's one of the most tumultuous elections in recent French history, and the choice for voters couldn't be more stark. Both mainstream political parties failed to make it into the second round. And for more on the French elections, we're joined now by Paul Smith. He's an Associate Professor of Francophone Studies at the University of Nottingham in England. First of all, thank you so much for your time, Paul. Now, let's start with who's had the most momentum going into this election today, do you think? Do you think either candidate gained more traction than the other after the debate?
I think that Macron gained the most traction. Le Pen's performance was a rather odd one. Her strategy seemed to be to simply attack Macron because he used to be François Hollande's finance minister, and that seemed to have backfired. Most of the polls coming out of the debate suggested that she'd performed badly, and people felt that she didn't look presidential. So I would say that the impetus that was generally with Macron certainly carried on after Wednesday's debate, if not increased. It'd be very interesting to see if there is a big differential today between the final vote and what people were predicting before the debate on Wednesday.
Now, there are expected to be a fair amount of abstaining voters, especially the more left-wing voters who feel unsatisfied with Macron. Mm-hmm. What do you think, or who do you think this will affect the most? I mean, which candidate will be crippled by this absent vote?
Well, if there is a high rate of abstention, and this is, is this a media story or is it really going to happen, then that would help Le Pen. Her voters are much more loyal, they're much more fixed, as we say, they're much more likely to turn out and vote for her. So Macron does have to be, and certainly Macron's supporters are concerned about an abstention rate, but nevertheless the opinion polls are still suggesting that as many as 76% of the electorate will turn out to vote. And remember, we didn't think that the rate of participation would be as high in the first round as it turned out to be, so it may well be that we've got this wrong as well, that the French will nevertheless go out and vote in the second round. Historically, that's what they've always done, but it will be very interesting to see what happens today in terms of abstentions. But I think the bottom line is abstentions will help Le Pen, though probably not enough.
It certainly seems like Macron is on the way to success. This stage polls are suggesting that Marine Le Pen won't be successful in this election. If she does lose today, what role does she have in politics going forward?
Yeah. Well, what will be interesting as well is if she does lose today will be her score. If she gets 40% or better, then she'll have done what the polls expect, and that will put her in prime position, in pole position for leading the opposition or being, a prime voice. But if she drops, and if something goes wrong with her vote today, if she drops to 35%, I think that there are challenges ahead. She's not completely without critics within her own movement, and there was some disquiet even amongst her supporters, although publicly they were making a lot of noise in her support after the debate on Wednesday. There was also some sort of disquiet about her performance, and if she doesn't perform well, then there could be some tough times ahead for her. And of course, with the general election then coming up in June, everybody's back in the game, the right and the far left, and she will be jockeying for position amongst them. And there's another election to be fought after this one, so it's not terribly clear. But I think if she does well, if she gets over 40%, then that's a boost for her. But if she drops to 35, for example, then some questions will be asked.
We know that this election is another example, perhaps, of this global shift to the right, what with Trump and Brexit, this sort of thing. But this particular election seems to be very much cut and dry, globalisation versus patriotism. What do you think that this election says about the state of France today?
I think what it says, well, that's the way Le Pen's wanted to present it. Globalisation versus patriotism or nationalism, I think, is a much more accurate way of describing it. But I think what it shows us is that France is split into not really four groups, but three. You have a left, you have a liberal centre, and you have an authoritarian protectionist right, or some of it's not even protectionist, some of it's, reasonably liberal. And it's the liberal centre that is kind of holding the thing together. Macron is that liberal centre. There are some of Fillon's voters who will come over to him. There are some people who voted for Mélenchon who will vote for him. So really you've got these three elements, and some of Fillon's voters will go and vote for Le Pen. So those are the three tendencies that we're seeing in France at the moment. So the old, we used to see that, and it used to be there, but behind the left-right divide. But now, with the, as you mentioned yourself, the main part is kind of falling apart. That's not so much masked between the left-right divide, but a three-way split. And it'll be intriguing to see how that plays out in the general election in June.
Very interesting. Thank you for that, Paul. That's Paul Smith there. He's an Associate Professor of Francophone Studies at the University of Nottingham.